Amina was just 11 years old, the youngest in her quiet Muslim family. But behind her innocent eyes hid a darkness no one could have imagined. In a shocking act that stunned a whole community, she took the lives of her entire family, not out of anger or revenge, but out of something far more chilling: boredom. In a quiet suburban neighborhood nestled among tree-lined streets and well-kept houses, the family of 11-year-old Amina lived what appeared to be a peaceful and ordinary life. Their home was modest but tidy, with a small garden out front where flowers bloomed every spring. The neighborhood was known for its strong sense of community, where families gathered for picnics and children played safely in the streets until dusk. Most neighbors recognized Amina's family as devout and respectful, people who attended the local mosque regularly and participated in community events. To anyone passing by, the family seemed close-knit and loving. Amina's parents were known to be hard-working and quiet, always polite, but rarely socializing beyond their immediate circle. The children, including Amina and her two younger siblings, were polite and well-behaved in school. Teachers described Amina as a bright and obedient girl, always sitting quietly in class and rarely causing trouble. There was no reason to suspect anything unusual. In fact, many neighbors admired the family's dedication to their faith and traditions, seeing them as a model household. Yet beneath the surface of normalcy, something was quietly unraveling. No one noticed the small signs, little moments that, in hindsight, hinted at a deeper struggle inside the home. Amina's world was filled with routine and order, but it was also marked by isolation. She spent much of her time alone in her room, her interactions limited to brief conversations with family members. Despite the warmth the family showed outwardly, Amina's inner life was lonely and suffocating. The strictness of the household, combined with the expectations placed on her, left little room for the natural joys and explorations of childhood. Days blended into one another, each filled with the same rituals and silence. The quietness of the home was not comforting. It was heavy and oppressive. Neighbors might hear the faint sounds of prayer or the rustling of a page from a book, but they never heard laughter or the playful noise typical of children her age. Amina's boredom grew steadily, feeding a restlessness that no one around her seemed to understand. Unlike the carefree children playing outside, she was trapped inside her own mind, seeking any escape from the dullness she felt. At such a young age, she began to harbor dark thoughts, ways to break free from the monotony, but no one could have predicted where these thoughts would lead. The community remained unaware of the storm brewing behind closed doors. From the outside, everything appeared calm and stable, but the truth was far more disturbing. The quiet neighborhood would soon become the scene of a tragedy that no one could have imagined, one that would shatter the illusion of normalcy and force everyone to confront the shadows lurking beneath seemingly perfect lives. As the days passed, neighbors noticed subtle changes. The usual sounds from the house faded completely. The children did not play outside anymore, and the family stopped attending the mosque. These small absences went mostly unnoticed at first. In a busy world, silence often passes without question. But soon, the silence grew heavier, more alarming, until it could no longer be ignored. The calm facade was about to be broken, revealing a horrifying secret hidden deep within the walls of that quiet suburban home. The silence that had settled over the neighborhood did not go unnoticed for long. Days turned into nearly a week without any sign of life from Amina's home. No laughter, no footsteps, no voices drifting through the windows. The neighbors who once saw a cheerful routine slowly began to feel uneasy. Calls to the family went unanswered. Concern grew quietly at first, then steadily into worry. It was a neighbor, an elderly woman who had lived on the street for decades, who finally alerted the authorities. She had tried knocking on the door several times, but was met only with silence. The curtains remained drawn, and no one came to answer. Something was wrong. The police arrived early one morning, moving cautiously up the driveway, their steps crunching softly on the gravel. Inside, the officers found a scene that sent a chill through even the most experienced among them. The house was eerily still, the air thick with a silence that felt unnatural. The living room showed no signs of disturbance, no overturned furniture, no broken objects, no indication of a struggle. It was as if everything had been frozen in time, but the true horror revealed itself as they moved from room to room. The entire family was found lifeless. Amina's parents, her two younger siblings, all victims of a violent and calculated act. The brutality of the crime contrasted sharply with the calmness of the scene. It was clear that whoever was responsible had planned it meticulously, leaving no obvious clues or signs of forced entry. The officer's eyes fell on Amina, who was discovered alone in her bedroom. She was unharmed and oddly still, sitting quietly, as if detached from the horror around her. At just 11 years old, she was the sole survivor, and soon the prime suspect. The realization sent shockwaves through the investigation. How could a child so young be involved in something so gruesome? As news of the tragedy spread, the community was shaken to its core. Friends and neighbors struggled to understand how such darkness could erupt in their midst. Questions filled the air. How had this happened? Was there anyone else involved? What had led to this massacre? The police launched an intensive investigation, carefully gathering evidence and examining every detail. Forensics teams combed through the house, searching for anything that could explain the unthinkable. The absence of forced entry suggested the killer was someone the family trusted, someone with access and knowledge of the home. Witnesses were interviewed, neighbors were questioned, and family friends were called in to provide insight. But no one had seen anything suspicious. No signs of tension or conflict had been noticed by those around them. The perfect facade had held until it shattered completely. As investigators pieced together the timeline, a disturbing picture emerged. The crime scene suggested premeditation. Each family member had been targeted carefully and deliberately. The precision of the attack baffled experts. This was not a random act of violence. It was something far more chilling. All evidence seemed to point back to Amina. Despite her young age, investigators found indications she had planned the killings. Items in her room revealed secret notes and makeshift plans. The coldness in her demeanor puzzled psychologists brought in to assess her mental state. The neighborhood mourned silently, the tragic story casting a long shadow over the once peaceful street. What had seemed like an ordinary family was now at the center of a nightmare, leaving everyone to grapple with the terrifying question: how could an 11-year-old girl be capable of such horror? The answer remained hidden, buried beneath layers of mystery and silence, waiting to be uncovered. Amina's case baffled everyone who encountered it. How could an 11-year-old girl be responsible for such a horrific crime? To understand what drove her to commit this act, experts were brought in to examine her psychological state. What they found was a troubling mix of emotional emptiness, detachment from reality, and an unsettling absence of empathy. Psychologists who studied Amina described her as deeply bored, so bored in fact, that it seemed to consume her entire world. Unlike most children her age, who find excitement in play or learning, Amina's days were marked by a restless emptiness. She appeared to drift through her routine without purpose or joy, as if trapped behind a glass wall separating her from the life she longed for. This boredom was not just a fleeting feeling. It was a dangerous force that slowly eroded her sense of right and wrong. Specialists noted that Amina showed signs of emotional neglect, even if her family had provided the basics like food and shelter. She craved attention and stimulation, but was largely left to her own devices, with little emotional connection or support. The strict household rules and the quiet atmosphere only intensified her sense of isolation. For Amina, the home was not a place of safety and warmth. It was a cage. What made the case even more unsettling was how methodical Amina had been. Despite her young age, she had researched ways to commit murder, studied the effects of various methods, and planned the timing carefully to avoid detection. Her actions were not impulsive, but calculated. This cold premeditation challenged common assumptions about childhood innocence. Mental health experts explained that in some rare cases, extreme boredom combined with emotional deprivation can lead to dangerous behaviors. When a child feels invisible or disconnected from the world, they may seek extreme ways to regain control or experience strong emotions. For Amina, the murders became a twisted experiment, an attempt to break free from the numbness that had settled over her life. Despite these findings, there was no simple explanation or excuse for what happened. Amina's mind was a complex puzzle, shaped by factors both internal and external. Her youth made it difficult for professionals to fully understand her motives or predict her future behavior. Some saw her as a victim of circumstances, while others feared the darkness she represented. The psychologists working on the case emphasized the importance of early emotional support and intervention in children's lives. They warned that neglecting a child's mental and emotional needs could lead to tragic outcomes. Amina's story was a harsh reminder that even those who seem quiet or obedient may be struggling deeply inside. As the investigation continued, experts tried to piece together how Amina's boredom turned into violence. They found clues in her secret writings and drawings, dark fantasies that revealed a mind grappling with emptiness and anger. These disturbing insights added layers to the case, showing a child far removed from innocence. The community was left to wrestle with this unsettling truth. The person responsible for destroying a family was not a stranger or a criminal mastermind, but an 11-year-old girl whose boredom and isolation had spiraled into darkness. It was a haunting reminder of how fragile childhood can be, and how easily pain can hide behind a quiet face. Behind the closed doors of Amina's home, there were stories that no one outside had ever heard. While the family appeared united and devout to neighbors and friends, the reality inside was more complicated. The investigation revealed that beneath the surface of tradition and routine, there were hidden cracks in the family's life. Cracks that, over time, grew wider and deeper, creating an environment of emotional distance and silence. Amina's parents, while hardworking and respectful, maintained strict rules that left little room for warmth or open communication. Their focus on discipline and religious duties shaped the household atmosphere, but also made it difficult for the children to express themselves freely. Amina, in particular, was expected to be obedient and quiet, her feelings often overlooked or dismissed. Though her parents provided the essentials of life, emotional support was scarce. This lack of connection contributed to Amina's growing loneliness. Friends and relatives described the family as private and reserved, rarely sharing their personal struggles. No one had noticed any outward signs of tension or distress. Yet, subtle hints began to emerge during the investigation, small incidents that suggested undercurrents of frustration and unmet needs. Amina's teachers recalled how she sometimes seemed withdrawn and distracted, her grades slipping occasionally, but no one suspected anything serious. Within the home, the younger siblings also experienced a lack of attention as the parents focused heavily on discipline. This created a quiet household where children were expected to follow rules without complaint, and emotional expression was often suppressed. Amina's isolation grew, compounded by the strict environment and the absence of nurturing affection. In such a setting, feelings of boredom turned into a dangerous restlessness. Further inquiry uncovered that the family had been struggling silently for some time. Neighbors mentioned that over the past months, they saw less of the family in social gatherings and mosque activities. The once regular presence of laughter and play faded, replaced by an uneasy quiet. It became clear that the family's external image masked internal struggles no one fully understood. Amina's secret writings and drawings painted a picture of her inner world, filled with dark fantasies and a desperate desire to escape the confines of her life. These creations were not simply childish imaginations, but reflections of her growing detachment from reality. The stark contrast between the family's public image and the hidden turmoil highlighted how emotional pain could be invisible to those outside. Psychologists explained that children like Amina, growing up in emotionally cold environments, often develop coping mechanisms that can spiral into dangerous behavior if left unaddressed. Without emotional connection, the mind can turn inward, breeding feelings of emptiness and sometimes hostility. The family's strict lifestyle, combined with a lack of emotional warmth, created fertile ground for Amina's dark descent. This revelation forced the community to rethink what they thought they knew about the family. It became clear that appearances could be deceiving, and that even families who seem perfect on the outside may be struggling behind closed doors. The tragedy was not just the act itself, but the failure to recognize and respond to the silent cries for help. In the end, the investigation exposed not only the horror of the crime, but also the profound consequences of emotional neglect. Amina's story serves as a warning. When children's emotional needs are ignored, the results can be devastating. The cracks hidden beneath the surface can widen until everything falls apart, leaving behind heartbreak and unanswered questions. The aftermath of the tragedy left the neighborhood and the wider community reeling. The brutal loss of Amina's family was more than just a shocking headline. It was a deep wound that affected everyone who had known them. People struggled to come to terms with the fact that such horror had occurred so close to home, and that the person responsible was a child barely old enough to understand the world. Amina was taken into custody, but was soon moved to a secure psychiatric facility where mental health professionals could study her case more closely. The challenge was immense: how to treat and understand an 11-year-old who had committed a crime so dark and deliberate. Experts continued to analyze her behavior, searching for answers about her mental state and the factors that had led to the murders. Therapists worked to untangle the complex web of Amina's thoughts and emotions. Though she remained largely withdrawn, small glimpses into her mind revealed a child lost in a fog of boredom, pain, and confusion. The facility aimed not only to protect society, but also to provide Amina with the care she desperately needed, a chance to heal, if healing was even possible. The case sparked widespread debate about how to handle crimes committed by children. The legal system struggled with how to balance justice and rehabilitation. Many questioned if an 11-year-old could fully grasp the gravity of her actions, and whether she should be held accountable in the same way as an adult. The tragedy raised difficult questions about mental health, childhood trauma, and the limits of the law. Community members mourned deeply, organizing vigils and memorials for the family. The mosque where the family had worshipped held special prayers, offering comfort to those affected. Yet beneath the grief was a lingering fear. How could something so terrible happen in a place that had seemed safe? The loss forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about emotional neglect and mental health in children. Schools and local organizations began to pay closer attention to the emotional well-being of their students, recognizing that signs of distress can be subtle and easily overlooked. Amina's story became a stark reminder that mental health is as important as physical health, and that early intervention can be life-saving. Psychologists and social workers use the case to educate others about the dangers of ignoring a child's emotional needs. They emphasize the importance of open communication, supportive environments, and the need for adults to be vigilant about changes in a child's behavior. The hope was that by learning from this tragedy, other families could avoid similar heartbreak. Despite all the efforts to understand and prevent such tragedies, some questions remain unanswered. What was going through Amina's mind in those final moments? Could anyone have stopped her? And will she ever be able to live with the weight of what she did? Amina's story is a haunting chapter in the community's history, a chilling example of how silence and neglect can lead to devastation. It serves as a warning that behind quiet faces and ordinary lives, pain can hide in the shadows, waiting to explode. In the end, the tragedy is a painful reminder of the need for compassion, attention, and care. It calls on society to look deeper, to listen harder, and to never underestimate the power of emotional connection, because sometimes it is the absence of that connection that leads to the darkest outcomes imaginable.